With all the talk around Donkey Kong lately, it's really easy to forget that Donkey Kong has been very prevalent throughout his 40 years at Nintendo. This character has always been front and center. He's always been getting new games. He's always been around in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's in the original arcade game or the Donkey Kong Country Returns duology, Donkey Kong has been there and prevalent forever. But the same could not be said for Diddy Kong. If you actually remember what it was like when Donkey Kong Country first came out, bone deep, that Diddy was actually way more popular with kids, the target demographic, than Donkey Kong himself was. He was smaller, he was faster, he had that really cool vibe to him. Diddy Kong was awesome. So cool, in fact, that when they produced a sequel to the game, they made it about him. They shelved Donkey Kong and gave Diddy his own game. And going forward, the character would reappear in Donkey Kong 64 and get his own racing spin-off, a competitor to Mario Kart 64 Diddy Kong Racing, which was a huge success. And throughout that entire generation, there was a very real debate over which of the two was better, Mario Kart or Diddy Kong Racing. And considering Mario Kart would go on to later become one of the biggest Nintendo franchises, that is not a mean feat on Diddy Kong's part. He competed with Mario. Sonic couldn't compete with Mario. Diddy Kong was huge. And yet these days, unfortunately, Diddy Kong has fallen by the wayside and has kind of become the sidekick character to Donkey Kong, as opposed to the protagonist he used to be. He's essentially a sidekick character in the newer Donkey Kong games, and we haven't seen a new Diddy Kong Racing in almost 30 years. It's been a long, hard road for our favorite chimp, but I really hope Diddy Kong eventually makes a return to the limelight, considering his very real historical significance in the franchise, considering he's been prevalent in Super Smash Bros., considering just how popular of a character he is. I hope that someday Diddy Kong returns to prominence. It's really incredible to see just how much of an impact Punch-Out on NES had on older gamers. It really was an iconic game for a lot of people because of the celebrity endorsement, because of the quality of the game itself, but it's really easy to forget that the protagonist, Little Mac, is, because of that success, an iconic video game character to begin with. This was the ultimate underdog story in video game form. A flyweight going up against Mike Tyson, and people loved it. The character was really popular, and unfortunately, because of Nintendo's unwillingness to produce new ones, unfortunately, the character has fallen from the public eye. He's not really someone we talk about. Even after receiving the ultimate honor of being playable in Super Smash Bros. 4, Little Mac still hasn't had that resurgence of popularity. To this day, we have not gotten a Punch-Out 4. I suppose people tend to remember the opponents more than the actual protagonist, but even with that in mind, Little Mac does deserve recognition for being a video game icon. It's crazy to think as to how good the original Double Dragon on NES even is to this day. But what's even more insane is seeing that in spite of the slew of beat-em-up games that have been made over the past several years, Streets of Rage 4 got made, River City Girls came out, there have been all these re-releases and ports and all this really good retro content. There has never been a really good Double Dragon successor. Unfortunately, this series seems stuck in the 80s, and it's such a shame, too, that the developers seem more interested in, parodying the characters as opposed to, actually utilizing them in any meaningful capacity. They're in River City Girls 2, but they're not doing anything because Marion did a bunch of sit-ups and is now taking care of, of herself. Now, that's funny, that's engaging, but when you actually look at like what Double Dragon is doing right now, when you see how what once was one of the greatest beat 'em up franchises in the world has become, you really get this sense that like this really should be an IP that should be remembered as fondly as Mortal Kombat, as Street Fighter 2, as like a lot of like the late 80s and early 90s just really good, amazing video games. This should be considered an iconic brand, but unfortunately, right now, they have faded into obscurity. Ninja Gaiden is still one of my favorite games on NES, and I've grown to really appreciate and love the Xbox reboot as well. I love Ninja Gaiden and consider it one of the big influences in my personal life and creative works, but it really needs to be understood that Ryu Hayabusa used to be considered a video game icon in the sense where the Ninja Gaiden trilogy on NES were the first games ever to have a really dedicated story told through cutscenes. This game actually was a major innovator at the time. And considering its nails hard difficulty and just amazing gameplay, like this quickly became like an iconic NES game. But over the years, because of a slew of bad decisions on Tecmo's part, a handful of poor ports for the Super Nintendo, the series never returned to Nintendo hardware, and, the decision to go with Xbox going forward, unfortunately, meant that the original Ninja Gaiden that people loved back in the day, in a lot of ways, never really resurfaced. It never came out of the shadows. So, with the recent announcement that there is a Ninja Gaiden 4 in production that is meaning to take the series back to its roots, I'm optimistic that it's going to be a really interesting, fun project. But unfortunately, I feel as if the days of Ryu being considered this Nintendo icon are long behind him. And it's an absolute shame, too, because this is a character that I would really, really want to see more of. There are video game characters that we love, and then there are video game characters that we hate. And it very well may be possible that the most widely hated character in Nintendo's history very well may be the first instance of this becoming a pop culture kind of meme. Back in the 80s, nobody hated any Nintendo character more than the Duck Hunt dog. And the fact that this hatred extended through decades to the point where the character actually appeared as a playable character in Super Smash Bros. Really just is a testament to its long-lasting infamy and the impact it's had on gamer culture. People hate this thing, and unfortunately, because of the nature of it, because of what it does, the nature of the games that it's in, when you look and see like just the Duck Hunt dog as a character, like, there's not really much more you can do with him. Like, even in Smash Bros., having him in there was kind of a stretch, and it didn't really do anything for the character's popularity. You either understood the joke or you didn't. And unfortunately, it feels like younger generations aren't necessarily aware of just how prevalent this thing actually was back in the day. And that's a crying shame in a manner of speaking. You'll never get to hear that laugh, but you will never understand those of us who have. The more I play it, the more I realize that Harvest Moon 64 is actually one of the best RPGs of that generation. And a big reason for that is just how the game chooses to depict living in a small rural community. You get to know other characters, you get to interact with them, and in one heart-wrenching incident, you even do get to see one of them die. It is a really wild, crazy experience that really can't be explained to people. It really is this extremely influential, popular game that would go on to influence projects like The Sims and Animal Crossing. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't really understand just how influential this series actually is. And that extends to its the iconic look of its main character. You know, the idea that you're a boy going out to live on the farm and like running a business and like forging these relationships with people, right? It is incredibly compelling, and it really makes you feel as if you are the character, right? This is a role-playing game in the purest sense of the word, in which you are a farmer who has to build your business and get married and start a family, right? It does such a great job just emphasizing the values of hard work, and just does a spectacular job of just basically creating this entire genre out of whole cloth. And these days, the game doesn't really get the credibility or the respect it deserves. You know, like so many Stardew Valley fans genuinely believe that Stardew is like an original concept, when it really is just a knockoff of Harvest Moon. So, with that being said, like the reason the game is on the list is because the more I play this game, like the more I realize just how much I love the character, just how much I love like the reoccurring themes in this game, and how it feels like a real evolution of what happened in Harvest Moon for the Super Nintendo. You know, the fact that like this is a direct sequel, like featuring the kids of the characters in the grandchildren of the characters in the original, is a really interesting decision that makes the world feel like alive and lived in, and just it really is an unmatched experience. If you haven't played Harvest Moon 64, I implore you that you do. Shocking absolutely no one, Star Fox is on the list. One of the absolute best games on Nintendo 64 that was never able to recapture its success. Even today, people look back on this specific game as one of the best titles ever made, and just a hallmark of game design in the 90s. An all-time classic that is still being played and enjoyed to this day. And meanwhile, Nintendo was never able to improve on the formula. They never actually really even tried that hard. And it's very frustrating to see, as someone who loves the game and understands just how popular and iconic it was. But the series used to be this big deal. It used to be this something that we looked forward to every generation. I remember where we thought it would be coming out on the Wii, and that was a huge deal because people understood just how big of a deal the motion controls would be for that genre. You know, like everybody loved the idea of Star Fox coming back. Everybody wants to see Fox get back in the R-Wing and go through another adventure. And unfortunately, when we finally got it with Star Fox Zero, people weren't happy for a lot of petty, ignorant reasons. It's simply been too long. I think a lot of people who love Star Fox like love it because of its how cutting edge it was, and just how incredible it was for the time, and they never really fell in love with the game itself, because Star Fox Zero, in a lot of ways, is actually quite a lot better than Star Fox 64, but it didn't have the same cultural impact because the gaming market had changed and the players had changed along with it. You know, Star Fox Zero had developed the formula so much and improved on 64's formula and its control scheme, but it wasn't able to win over the hearts of people who had like moved past this game in the 90s. It just felt as if the only people who really care about Star Fox at this point are people who have been playing this game since it first came out. So to me, I think this is why Star Fox is kind of a forgotten thing, because people don't understand what really makes Star Fox 64 and Star Fox Zero such spectacular games. And until the audience begins to appreciate what these games actually are, we're stuck in this rut where people continue to put Star Fox 64 on a pedestal without really understanding why. Star Fox 64 is a great all-time classic, but most people do not have the capacity to understand why. It's really easy to forget what a big deal Turok was back in the day. It created this really interesting world you could explore and fight dinosaurs. It was so much fun. It was engaging, it was fresh and original, and it played completely differently than games like GoldenEye and other FPS games on other platforms, such as Doom. Like, Turok was a truly innovative, revolutionary game that feels like it's been lost into history. Like, a lot of people tend to really downplay the significance of the N64 first-person shooters, even though these clearly were innovating over their inferior PC counterparts, right? It is remarkable to see just how games like GoldenEye or Perfect Dark have been downplayed over the years, but I think the game that got this the worst is Turok, because now that I've played it myself, I can tell you that this game is just jam-packed with creative level design, great platforming, amazing action, and just unforgettable experiences. I thought this game was an absolute blast to play. I can only imagine just how much fun this was back when it first came out on the N64. This is a really good example of just how good that console actually was. Considering the current state of the Castlevania IP at Konami, it's safe to say that Dracula went from being one of the iconic video game villains to just kind of existing. We haven't gotten any new Castlevania games since Order of Ecclesia. And, the Netflix cartoon and everything Konami's been doing since then has done nothing but kind of ruin this very real legacy of the character. From his heartbreaking origin story to all of his countless returns, Dracula should be considered this huge deal in the world of gaming. And among NES fans, he certainly is, right? Castlevania was very well regarded on the NES, but over the years, Castlevania went from being this huge deal to being a B-list franchise, and now it doesn't really seem to exist at all. And all the other extended characters, all the characters who have dedicated their entire lives to destroying Dracula, characters like Simon, Richter, Maria, Jonathan, Charlotte, Shinoa, like all of them, all these great tertiary characters are protagonists of their own games, heroes of their own story. Like, they have also gone on to be forgotten. And it is an absolute crying shame, and something that I, as a hardcore Castlevania fan, deeply, deeply resent. Who else could be number one other than the woman who I voted for in the Super Smash Bros. DLC poll? That's right. I seriously told Sakurai, I told Nintendo that I wanted Alexandra Roivas to be in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Now, ultimately, they went with K. Rool instead, which I think is absolutely the right decision to make. But for my personal opinion, like, I really wanted it to be Alexandra. I really wanted a sequel to Eternal Darkness. I really wanted to get the character to get the credit she deserved, and I really wanted more people to learn about Eternal Darkness, this iconic horror game from Nintendo that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Nintendo is absolutely capable of producing high quality horror games that are just as good, if not better, than Resident Evil or Silent Hill. This was a game that really resonated with me on a lot of levels. This is a game that I thought was so innovative and so creative and really demonstrated just how developers can do more with this kind of horror gameplay and style and such. And to me, Alex is the reason why it all comes together so well. Because for a large portion of the game, Alex is unaffected by what's going on. In the mansion, during her time period, like, she is not being attacked. There's nothing going on. There is some crazy mystery in the air, but over the course of the game, you slowly start to feel like something's going to happen any second, and then eventually it does. It's such a great setup to a game, and is a great way to introduce you to all the other characters, and it's something that I wish other horror games did more often. To me, Alexandra is someone that had a lot of potential to be an iconic video game heroine and a horror icon. The same way that like James Sunderland is for Silent Hill, or Leon is for Resident Evil. Like I think in a lot of ways, Alexandra is the Nintendo equivalent. And unfortunately, because of the failures of Silicon Knights and because of Nintendo's inability to find another developer that could produce a sequel, like the series is currently in limbo. But I am always optimistic that at some point in the future, someone's going to come along and make this game happen and just really, really showcase what made Eternal Darkness so great.